Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's webinar. We've got the webinar tonight on goal setting, and your panelists tonight are Lynn. So if you'd like to say good evening, Lynn.
Good evening, hello from Staffordshire here.
And we've got Neil Peake as well. Evening, Neil.
Good evening from very, very wet Suffolk.
So you've had a drop of water. And yeah, we're recording this evening's webinar just so everybody knows that we're recording that. And on the control panel, just to run through the control panel very briefly, on your right-hand side of your screen, you have an arrow which indicates the control panel comes in and out at the top, and you'll have some little buttons underneath that light up different colours. There's a hand there for you to put a hand up if you're wanting to ask something, but further down, go back, we have the question box, which you can type questions into the test question box and ask the panel any questions. You can direct the questions at whoever, or I'll just ask the panel in general. So, good evening, Frank. He's just typed in evening all, so he's found the question box. We'll press on with this webinar now, and we'll just go through the goals for tonight's session. And the first thing is, what are the reasons for setting goals? What are they for? Why are they there? And we're going to be looking at pupils' goals, and we're also going to not forget about your own personal goals as well, whether that's in the business or whether it's your personal goals that are outside your business as well. You may even have training goals that you want. So we'll be looking at different types of goal setting, but just a quick quote from Earl Nightingale, just to show us how long goals have been about and people successfully setting goals. People with goals succeed because they know where they're going. And Earl Nightingale was a radio presenter and motivational speaker. So quite a good quote there from some time ago. And I can get that to come on to the next one. What are the reasons for setting goals?
Thanks, Ed. I think, yeah, that's mine, isn't it? So,
yep.
Just to say that I like that quote, because if you don't set a goal, you haven't got a clue what you're trying to achieve or where you're trying to aim for. And some instructors, when I get in the car and I'm helping them with training and I'm talking about last lessons that they did, often say something like, well, we just did a general lesson, Lynn. And actually, when we talk about it, they don't have clear goals that they set with the pupils, and that's absolutely vital, because if you look at these bullet points now, it can make things much more specific. So you can define things very specifically, very crystal clear about what you want to achieve and when you want to achieve it by. And I think the important thing about goals is that it can lead you into the end goals. So an end goal for a pupil might be their theory test, their practical test, becoming a really good driver. Those are long end-term goals, but along the way we want shorter performance goals. So for example, a lady today, when I talked to her in my lesson with her, what she wanted to improve, because she's absolutely terrified of it, is coming down onto a slip road and getting the entrance onto the dual carriageway much better. She's had lessons with somebody else in a different part of the country, taken 5 tests, and yet she still cannot come down onto a slip road on her own. So it was probably explains why she didn't get those tests actually. But so her goal was to, or one of her goals out of 2, was to get down the slip road comfortably and start to feel more confident about it and to practice it. I think if you give goals and you've got a goal for the end of the lesson, just 2 or 3, it gives them responsibility as well. It helped her understand what she was trying to achieve, because it's not my lesson. It's not my lesson to say what we do necessarily, but it gave her responsibility. And she started to become aware when the lesson went on as to how much she was improving as well. I think it helps the person who's setting the goals to own the session, because they're empowered with knowing what they want to do and learn and try and achieve. And so it motivates people. If you have no goal and you're just going on a general lesson, how do you really know what you're trying to achieve by the end? There's no real satisfaction at the end like there is if you've got a goal. I think there's another slide here, Ed, as well.
Yeah, there is. Sorry, I was just... Thanks for the prompt.
That's okay,
There
you're
you
having
go.
a snooze.
Yeah. No, I'm just looking through, making sure the questions and everything are all right. So
Okay.
prompt me when... Yeah.
Helps to focus the mind, because she was very focused on what the two things we were doing were. One of them was coming down onto the slip rows and trying to get that better for her to be more confident, and the other was that she'd already last lesson managed to achieve coming into roundabouts much more slowly, but what she hadn't managed to achieve was turning ahead and looking early enough to help her make that entrance onto the roundabout. So that was the other goal. So those were the two goals that we set for that session. And by the end of it, she was absolutely thrilled, because she skipped off really happy, because she'd actually got quite a long way. One of them she'd achieved virtually all together, and the other one she was well on the way with, and she could see that. So it develops concentration, and it's what's important to the person who set the goals, which should be the pupil. It gives you self-belief, because she went off believing that she could actually do that, and it clarified for her that she could do those things, because we need to go back to the goals. Well, throughout the lesson we referred back to them and how she felt she was doing with them, and it just developed confidence. She left me a lot more confident than when she started the session. So really, to me, that's why we need goals in a lesson.
Thanks, Lynn. So, Neil, I think you're going to take on this one.
I certainly am, yeah. If I can just explain to our listeners that I go back an awful long time. I trained to be an instructor in the 1970s, when there was no such thing as goals, no such thing as aims and objectives. As I started to teach, and having known nothing about aims and objectives, I then took a course at a college and realised from that point onwards that we as ADIs needed something different. We needed to focus around our clients. And this is when aims and objectives first came in. This was around about 1978. Up until that point, the SEs used to just sit in the back of the car, really weren't interested whether the pupil was learning a lot or not. All they were interested in doing was sitting in the back of the car, your car, because they were told to. And when you say these sort of things to the DVSA, they raise their eyebrows at you. But it was true. So traditionally, we set an aim and objective, which has now become the goals. Now, the question is, should this be instructor-led, or should it be client self-learned or the pupil-led for their goals? Should it be short? Should it be medium? Should it be long? It can be any of these. And this is what we'll find out as we go further along. Over to you, Ed.
Yeah, thanks for that, Neil. Just got a question on here. What's the main differences between aims and objectives? What's the reason for the change to become goals rather than aims and objectives?
Personally, I feel there is absolutely no difference, but those learned friends of mine will tell us differently. I still say the only goal I ever knew prior to the 70s which was on a football pitch. But now, as I say, I understand what a goal is and what the client is about or trying to achieve. It is so important to have goals, whether they be small or whether they be large. We must set ourselves goals.
Can I just say, Ed, that when I trained to become a teacher, which was a long time ago, we had aims and objectives all the time about lessons, and the difference was that actually the aims then were the very long-term things, so they're what we call the long-term goals, and the objectives were the shorter-term ones for that specific lesson. So really the aims and objectives were just the short and the long-term goals. And I think these are all just words, but if we're going to look at sort of language for today, we tend to talk about targets and goals rather than aims and objectives. It's really just a language thing, but that's what's on the standard check marking form now, isn't it? So it's what we tend to talk about. We talk about goals, but I think we're referring to short and long term. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, yeah. I think, like we've said, it sums it up that it's a play on words, really, isn't it? It's just a different way of wording something, and it's just a more modern way of looking at it. Yeah. Thanks for that. Um, is it possible to have a lesson without setting goals, i.e., just having a general drive?
Lynn or myself, who would you like to answer that?
Go on, Neil. I think you'll like this one.
There's no way in the world that you can just go for a drive without setting some sort of goal. I said you said your client setting the goal. Your client might just say to you, "I would like to go on a drive." Yes, but what is the aim and objective, or what is the goal for that drive? Is it to improve your driving? Is it to improve the mirrors? It to improve the awareness, positioning? The client must have a reason. You just can't go for a, in brackets, drive.
Lynn?
Yeah, I agree with Neil completely. Yes, of course, you could just go on a general drive and not set a goal. You can do really what you like when you're in the car, can't you, to a certain degree? But you've got to ask yourself, what is that person going to learn and what's the experience they're going to have? If you set the goals, the experience is going to be so much richer and so much deeper and very clear at the end, and it's going to pass over to them and make them much more confident. I'm not really into these what I call wishy-washy ideas where we just set out and do a general lesson with everything in it.
I think you covered it pretty much on those previous slides as well, didn't you? Where it was encompasses all of those bullet points that we had on the previous slides, really. Right.
I wondered how somebody would get on a standards check if they just said, "We're going to go for a drive today."
Well, not very well, because you're going to miss a lot of your marks in the final boxes, aren't you? So not very well.
Yeah, well, even on the top box in when the lesson planning, it'll come into the lesson planning, doesn't it? Yeah, so there's just going to be no plan of a lesson. Yeah. So we were talking about in the earlier slides having performance goals and end goals. So performance goals are really what we were talking about with having the short-term goals. End goals are looking at where you're going to be right at the end. And traditionally, it was the instructor that was setting the goals and saying about where they were going to be by the end of the lesson. And that's swung round a bit now, so that we're involving the pupil, so that the pupil gets more involved in the lesson and has some sort of say into where they're going. And there's a couple of models here that I just wanted to quickly go through, but they are quite a big area of these, and it's the GROW model and T-GROW. The GROW model is, if I just go on to the next slide, and it's setting the goals, which is what tonight's webinar is really all about. But then it's looking at the reality of those goals, the options, and the will or the way forward. And if you put T-GROW there, all you do at the top is you put topic in there. So that's where when Neil was talking about, going the wrong way. If we go back to there, where Neil was saying about sometimes it can be a little bit instructor-led as well. The instructor can suggest the way that the topic is going to be formed and bring into a new subject. So sometimes it's going to be okay with discussion through your pupil to maybe suggest that there's certain topics they might want to go forward with, because sometimes, I don't know if you guys have found this, but sometimes the pupil just hasn't got an idea of the way forward to go, and some suggestions may be needed for them to choose from. So it's setting the midterm goals to actually achieve the end goals. And end goals can be anything from getting through to the theory test, going through to the test day, but then we've really got to remember that it doesn't just end at test day. it goes on for more than that. Our main thing that we're aiming for is to produce a driver that has a skill for life. And another thing that for the pupil is that they're probably going to want to own their own car. And that's quite an important goal that we can help them with as well, because in the conversations you can start talking about, have they thought about the cars that they'll use, the size of car that they're going to use. These are all goals that they're working towards. So some of the goals don't have to be necessarily focused just on the lessons. They can go beyond the lessons and even further into more of a coaching one, is getting the pupils to work on self-reflection and how somebody can reflect on what they've done. And I think you have gone through a self-reflective process with your driver today, did you, Lynn, with the slip roads and about why they wanted to get there? Yeah. So
Yeah.
what sort of things, how did you lead into that to set that goal? Did you get them to reflect on their previous one to set the goal for that
Well,
lesson?
yeah. Yeah, we recapped the last lesson. So I've been away for a couple of weeks. So she got in and said she was nervous. She'd forgotten everything. We talked back and I reminded her what we did the last time I'd met her. We'd done some dual carriageway she's getting, and she agreed she was improving with driving along the dual carriageway, even overtaking on it. But what really scared her was coming down and joining up. And each time we do it, of course, it's slightly different. So the length of the slip road, what you can see, all this sort of thing. And she really didn't like just turning finally at the end ahead just to the slight blind spot to see what was there. So that was what we decided we'd focus on. So I just asked her for a goal today then, would you like to look at the coming down the slip road and try and improve that? So I helped her word it so that it was quite specific, but we agreed it together, and it was her decision that that's what she wanted to look at. So it started with a conversation about the last lesson and led into the goal.
Yeah, because quite often I think people get a misconception that the entire goal has to come from with client-centered learning being the main focus. Now, a lot of people seem to get confused with that we can't say anything, but yet what you've just said there is you actually clarified and helped and suggested actually getting the goal really specific and working on something that you're going to work on next, which is smart. And that for an end goal for your driver would be that main bullet point at the end, being a safe, confident driver. If she had have got through her previous tests, how safe and confident would she have felt? Have you any ideas, Lynn?
She wasn't ready for a test. She just seriously was not ready, and I think she can see that now. And it was several years ago, so she took it when she was quite considerably younger and failed. And I think she can see she wasn't ready now.
Yeah, yeah. So that's about the short-term and long-term goals, and we also have medium goals which fit in between there as well. All building up to a crescendo where we meet the final destination, the final end goal. And as I say, quite a big topic that we've gone through there. So the grow model itself and how we use T-Grower, we're going to look at using on a separate webinar. But what I'd like you to think about at the moment is think about one of the lessons that you've just taken today, and think about at the beginning of the lesson how you established, or even partway through, if something needed developing, how did you actually set the goal? And think about whether it was this. Was it smart? Now, a lot of people are starting to hear about these different sort of words, and Lynn's going to go through this SMART model now to help you understand how this could develop. Lynn?
So if you're thinking about perhaps a goal that you set with a pupil in a driving lesson that you've done recently, perhaps today, yesterday, and I think about the one that I did with my pupil Michelle today, I think it's really important that we have SMART goals, because then they can be specific. Quite often I'll hear somebody say something like, well, let's get roundabouts better, or let's come into junctions better, let's start slowing down earlier. But they're not really what I call a SMART goal. And to make goals really good, they do need to be smart. So think about the one that I did today, for example, and that was Michelle's goal of wanting to come down and make herself more comfortable and confident and approach the dual carriageways down the slip road to join up. So it's quite specific. It wasn't just let's go out and improve dual carriageways. It was quite specific because we were looking at a set part of the dual carriageway. So she could then measure that. She knew exactly by the end how she felt with that, how she felt feelings wise, but how it improved as she went through the lesson. Where we've got agreed on there, sometimes people will call that one attainable. So the A can be attainable as well. And it was attainable for her because she's been on dual carriageways before, but that was her fear. So it was an attainable goal, but for her, actually, it did stretch her. Because I don't believe that goals should be so simple that you just go off and they can do them straight away. They need to push people and stretch them. So it did. It was attainable, but it stretched her. It was realistic because she could do it, but she was having difficulties at the beginning. But it was quite a realistic goal for her. And it was time-bound because by the end she knew how much better she got. She scaled herself from 1 to 10 at the start and the finish. And also, it's time-bound because she wanted to go on and try it again. She realised she could get better, but we were going to give it a few more lessons and put it into some more lessons as one of her goals. So to me, that particular goal was a SMART goal. So maybe think of a goal that you set and just ask yourself if it was all of those things. Do you want to add anything, Ed or Neil?
No. No, I think you've covered that really well. Sorry, I was just sending a message there because I saw somebody's hand was up. Sandra Brownlow, I've sent you a message there. I saw your hand was up. In the chat box, there should be a question there. If you just type it away, it should send an answer back to me if you have a question about anything.
One thing I did say earlier as well, Ed, was that coming away from perhaps a driving lesson, put yourself in a business mind as an ADI, and maybe your goal is that you need to respond to customers better because you're not getting very many of the people that ring up. You're not actually managing to turn them into customers. So one of the goals that you might set is that you must return calls because sometimes you know you don't. But actually, is that a SMART goal? Just saying return calls, and it isn't. But what could be a SMART goal would be to perhaps answer the phone within 5 rings for 90% of the time. That's much more measurable, it's time bound, and it is something that realistically you can achieve, but it's also very specific. So I mean, another thing could be that you want to follow up inquiries. But what you could say for that is that you will follow up all customer inquiries within 24 hours of a call coming through. Again, that's the difference between an ordinary goal and a SMART goal. So we need to try and aim to be fairly smart when we set the goals.
Brilliant. Thank you. Oh, we've got a reply from Sandra. That's brilliant, Sandra. Thanks for that. Thanks for the information there. Right. Changing goals.
Yes, this is a topic which I'm sure happens to most ADIs, but sometimes ADIs are frightened to change goals. If I could just quote what happened to me on my last standards check, I've just recalled that we'd set out our goals, and whilst we'd started off within 5 minutes of the lesson, what happens? The fog come down, and the pupil started asking questions about the fog. So we pull over, and she then starts to tell me what she knows about fog, what she doesn't know about fog. So then we set different goals. How fast should we drive in fog? What else do we require on in the car? So the candidate then was quite happy to start changing those goals to meet with the fog situation. But under normal lesson conditions, you might find that you are trying to achieve a particular goal, your pupil doesn't reach the standards, or on the opposite side, they've gone beyond that standard, Who decides to change? Is it you, or is it the pupil who decides to do the change? Well, it should be your candidate, your pupil. They should be the one, although you are the one who's actually in overall charge, and you can hint at the change. Let me give you an example. Just say, for argument's sake, we're doing right and left-hand turns, and we find we come to a junction, and the pupil consistently rolls back on an incline. Is it not the best practice to pull up on the left-hand side and say, what do you think is going wrong? Do you think we ought to change what we're doing? It's up to you. Would you like to do hill starts? Of course you would. Right, what we're going to try and do, we're going to start on a small incline first of all and try and improve it till you can handle all these changes. On the other hand, you might have gone ahead, completed all those right and left-hand turns very well indeed, and moved on to something else. So that's how I say you should change. And the importance of changing again, just to remind you, when you're on a standards check, do not be frightened to change what you have set or what your pupil has set out, the goals for that lesson. Lynn?
Can I just say I totally agree with you, and the bit about the fog there, because that was your standards check, which is like should be like any normal lesson. That's great to have changed the goals with the pupil, because after all, they may never get a day when it's foggy again, so they may never get that opportunity again. So to have gone back and changed the goals and look at it from a different perspective, to me, was great. And as we know, you got a really good mark in your standards check. So clearly that was what they wanted to see. The number one reason we still know from the DVSA why people actually fail the standards check is because they fail to adapt to the lesson when it needs changing and to change the goals. So that's how important that was. So clearly that was the right thing to do.
Thanks for that. And some good questions there, Neil, for you.
Good questions, right. What would you like to get from today's session? This is a question that you would ask your pupil at the beginning. If you've never done setting goals, or in the old days objectives, etc., etc., you would ask the client, what would you like to get from today's session? And they would tell you, hopefully, or sometimes they go, shrug the shoulders, I don't know. You tell me, you're the instructor. And then it's up to you to start, lead them in. Were we very good on our mirrors last time? How would you mark yourself out of 10? And if they said anything sort of between a 7 and a 3, then, oh, that sounds like a good idea. Can we improve on that? Right, you set yourself a target then, a goals today, that by the time of today's session is finished, you'll be up to an 8 or a 9 with those mirrors. Yes? Good. So what is it you want to achieve? I want to achieve an 8, 9 or 10. What can we do about that right now? Right, I can start looking in those mirrors more frequently. And my answer then is, well, if you don't, each time you miss, you get fined 10 pence, and that goes into my holiday fund. Is that good? Yeah, that's good. So what is your overall goal? And from that moment onwards, they never miss another mirror. No, you've got to bring a little bit of humour into all our lessons, or I feel you should do. Otherwise, you could have a one-way conversation with your pupil, and that is disastrous.
Sorry, I think what we maybe don't want to just get in and say is, what do you want to do today? I think yes. The goals should come from reflecting on what they did last time, or what they've done between the time that you've seen them, because they might have gone out and practiced and something might have happened, or they want to tell you about it. So really the goals should come, like you're saying, from what happened before. So it's not just a case of what do you want to do today. It can't be cold like that. It has to come with your help from a conversation about what they did last time. What went well, but what did you want to improve? And the improvements are where the goals can start to come in. So what do you want to improve today? How can we do that now? How can I help you with that right now? What's the end goal? And then you can name.
Yeah.
If I can just say, Lynn's absolutely right. Everything is based on what you've previously done and what needs to be improved on what you've previously done. That's correct.
I think this is also important. The goal setting is quite important for people that for building rapport, and it helps to build the trust, doesn't it? When you're asking them, they feel as that they're a lot more trusted because you're getting them involved in the lessons. So then the rapport builds quicker, I think, between you and your pupil when you use goal setting like this.
That's right. My instructor's ever so nice. He talks me, he let me think what I'm doing, and I always know I'm doing it right. He's a wonderful man. You really ought to go for him for driving lessons.
Yeah.
Oh, that's my business head coming on again.
Yeah.
Can I mention, I had a girl some time ago who had 2 or 3 other instructors, hadn't got anywhere near as far as a test, but has had literally hundreds of lessons. And we went out for the first session, and I was pretty horrified by what I was seeing after the number of lessons that she'd had. But the overall thing that I could hear all the time was, I'll never do this, I'll never get through a driving test. And that was all she and her parents could talk to me about. Will she ever get a test? And my answer to that was, I'm sure we can, but can we just take a few steps back? Because that's the long-term goal. Can we start to think of some short-term ones here? And then I made her together at the start of each lesson do something she had never done before, which was set short-term goals, just little things. And then she started to really enjoy it more and get a little bit more confidence, because she had no confidence at all, because she was starting to achieve the very short-term goals. And sometimes we struggled and we didn't make them. We didn't always achieve them, but we discussed that. We tried them again. We tried them from a different perspective. And slowly, and it was a very slow process, she got better and better. And she did pass a test. And to me, she's one of the pupils that sticks in my mind. We've all got those, because the day I brought her back from her second test, when she passed on her second test, her mum and dad and granny came out, and they were all just in floods of tears. And her mother grabbed me and said, we never thought she'd do this. Because they didn't have any sort of faith or confidence in her. But part of coaching is about believing that somebody can do something. And I did believe she could, but I just didn't think she was going about it quite the right way. And the short-term goals were what saved her, because she was just always thinking about the driving test, and that seemed totally unobtainable.
Yeah.
It's a bit like the elephant. Sorry, Neil, go on.
Go ahead, Ed.
Yeah,
All right,
it's a bit like the big elephant, isn't it? The way to eat an elephant is one piece at a time. Cut it up into small chunks, put some away, save some for later. And if you sat there in front of the elephant and tried to eat it at one go, well, it just wouldn't do, would it? I know sometimes when you get a large meal put in front of you, you almost become not hungry because it's too big and it outfaces you. So it is really important to get the goal set correctly to the right size and make it achievable. Go on, Neil, I'll let you talk now. Yeah.
I was going to say, you haven't met my wife, have you? No, what I was going to say is I'm sure there's lots of our listeners out there now have got questions about tonight's show, and this is the time when they should start thinking about writing them down. Don't matter how extreme those questions might seem, that might be just the question that precedes them and propels them on to becoming an excellent instructor. So put your thinking caps on and send some questions through us right now, because we're ready for you.
I love the elephant bit, Ed. I think you could use that with pupils. I should have used that with her and explained to her about trying to eat an elephant. That was good.
Yeah.
Right.
I use that with my pupils, actually. Yeah, and it does anything like that. And I've been out for meals, and there's a particular pub that I won't go to anymore because the meals are so ginormous that it just puts you off when it arrives. It's so big, and I've got a fair appetite. I'm not a small bloke, but it does put me off a little bit when you get so much.
Yeah, we don't have elephants served around this area.
Hey, you've got to come up to Yorkshire, you see. Right. Can you hang on? If we move it on to the next slide, I just want
Slide,
to I just want to reply to a question that's come through that I can't.
okay.
I think there's
All right.
part of it missing. Lynn, no, Neil. I think you were going to go through business goals.
Yes, business goals. If I could just say that when I started in business in the 70s, I had all sorts of goals that I'd set myself, some very, very short-term ones, and then some long-term ones. The long-term ones were the ones where I would be sitting in office, answering the telephone all day long, and watching all the cars go sailing by, and watching the bank balance go up. Then I realised how unrealistic it was. So I had to start, first of all, by improving myself. You cannot have long-term business goals unless you are an expert in the field yourself. And believe you me, you have to train and retrain and work and work and work. This brings us on to training goals. You as an instructor, just because you have qualified as an ADI, doesn't mean to say that's the be-all and end of it. That is just the start of your career. You must then set other goals to make yourself better, to make yourself a better teacher, which is what I done in the 70s. Started in the 70s, I started highway code lessons, which was way before anybody else done. And I used to fill the classroom up, fill it up every single week. And then we were doing it twice a week, 3 times a week. And by now I'm putting more and more cars on the road because I have improved myself. Set your personal goals. You too can achieve in this business. You won't do it by undercutting. Believe you me, because you need finances to expand. You need finances to retrain yourself. Without charging the right price, you cannot afford to do it. But set personal goals, little goals to start with. What you hope to achieve by this time next month. What you hope to achieve this time in 6 months. What you hope to achieve this time in 12 months. I set all those goals, and believe you me, you can become very successful.
Lynn, have you anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, you asked me to talk about the personal goals, so I got left with those. Okay, well, I'm going to be really honest with you now. I think one
When
of
I'm
the
on a
worst
roll.
Whoa, one of the worst things about this job is that we're sitting down all the time. Generally, we don't get out very much. Exercise, unless we go off to the gym or something, and we're really strict with ourselves, is really quite difficult. And I've found over the last year or so that I've put quite a lot of weight on, which is quite horrifying me. So I made myself a personal goal that I was going. Why are you laughing, Neil? I made a personal goal that I was going to go out every single day and walk. And actually, I started that in October, and I've now lost nearly a stone. Not with diet, but just by going out every single day and walking. And each day, I set myself sort of where I'm going to start off to, and then I see how far I want to go. And I might do some hills, or if I don't feel like that, then I won't bother. But there's very rarely a day when I don't do this now, and I make time for myself, and that's been a personal goal, because believe me, with all the work I do and for the ADI and JC, it's very easy for a day to go by and not to take half an hour out for myself. But I've done that now, and it's worked, so I recommend it. And exercise is great, but that was my personal goal, and I feel really confident now because I've actually started to achieve that, so that's great. So now I've told you all about it, I need to keep that up, I guess.
It's
That's
not noticeable.
Oh, thank you, Neil. I love you too.
And I think sometimes when you're goal setting, especially personal goals, sometimes you need to share the goals. I think that's quite an important strategy behind having goals. If you're setting personal goals, tell somebody about it, because then you feel more obliged to fulfill that goal as well. So by sharing goals, it works that way. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
We have a question that I've been asked to put to you, and that's: should the goal you both set be reachable?
the goal
Linda,
that we set be reachable?
Yeah, should the
Yeah, it should be attainable, shouldn't it? That's one of the bits of SMART. It should be reachable and attainable, but it doesn't mean to say it has to be reached totally within that lesson. You know, we don't all finish all the goals and totally get them 10 out of 10, but as long as there's some way towards them and there's some improvement and they can see they've learned something, then they will realise that they can complete the other bit. I often get pupils to think back to what we used to be able to do. That's what I said to Michelle today when she said to me, I'm still not 100% with coming down onto these slip roads. But then I made her think how she used to feel coming down them and how tense she got, and the fact that she's actually not doing that anymore. And she agreed. So sometimes you have to think back to think where you are right now. So they should be attainable and reachable ultimately, but not necessarily within that particular lesson, as long as something's been achieved.
That's where the time frame comes in SMART, isn't it?
Mm.
Yeah. And they're never set in stone either, really, are they? The goals, they are movable, like we said when Neil was talking about how to change goals. They can be reshaped, redone, revisited even, to help them attain that goal. So, has that answered that question enough for you there, Gavin? If you could just give us a yes or a no to that, or if you have another question for that. And there are no more questions at the moment. So if you have any questions, now's your chance to ask the questions. Lynn, do you want to? Oh, we've just lost Neil there. Just suddenly gone.
Hi, Nick.
Have you anything you? Oh yeah, Gavin's put yes. That's answered his question quite nicely. Thanks, Gavin. Have you anything you want to say? Add to tonight?
I haven't got anything extra to add to tonight. No, I think we've learned quite a lot about goals there. And I think the GROW model, where goals is the start of that, is something that we can look at on a different night in a different one.
Yeah. For some reason, that has just gone back to there. Put that back on. Fly through them all again. Because we missed that one. That's the one that we've missed. So the next webinar that we've got coming up is on Tuesday the 28th of June at 8 o'clock. You're back again, Neil. That's at 8 o'clock, and it's terminology used by trainers. So the different types of terminology and how clear and how much clarity there needs to be within the terminology that we use. So that's we're going to have a different set of panelists for that one. So change of faces. Unfortunately, you're stuck with me as presenter because I'm the one that operates the platform. So thank you everybody for listening. And Neil, have you anything else you want to add just before we finish on tonight?
Oh, we've lost Neil.
Oh, no sound, Neil.
No.
Okay. So thanks for listening, everybody. Unfortunately, Neil, with no
we'll
sound.
Say goodbye.
Yeah. Oh, you're in now. Yeah, you're back.
I'm in now.
Yes, back in the room.
Well, as a pity we haven't had a few more questions, because from those questions is where we can give a lot of people the correct answers, hopefully. I've been sitting here all night watching this little fly on the screen, and it's been calling out. Now I realise it's your cursor.
You're on a learning curve.
I've been trying to kill it. I've been trying to swat it.
Yeah, sorry about that, Neil. I can't make it disappear. So I hope everybody else isn't seeing that as well. Sorry, folks, if you are, but I need to move my cursor about to go to different areas of the control panels. So if you're seeing that, that's why my cursor keeps flying about. Okay. Well, with no more questions there, what I'd like to do is thank everybody for turning out tonight. It's been a great attendance tonight. And we had a question on here about will the slides be available for everybody to see? We have a new website coming up, don't we, Lynn? And
yes,
we're going to have a special area for the webinars, aren't we, on that website?
Yeah.
So the answer to that is yes, they're going to be available on the website, which is launched very soon, isn't it?
Yeah, it's going to be launched at the weekend, and all being well, that will go absolutely fine. And after that, it's still a work in progress. So there is a space with the webinar details, but we'll get the slides up there for you. I think that's the best place for them.
Yeah.
And just to say thanks very much. I've enjoyed tonight. I hope everybody else has as well. Thank you.
Yeah, we've got a few thank yous here as well from Joe, Mike, Frank. They're saying thanks all. Quite a few more as well. Lot of thank yous coming through. So thanks, guys. It's been lovely speaking to you. See you at the end of June.
Bye bye for now. Nice speaking to you all. Bye bye.
Take care. Bye.